Hello Galactic family. Welcome with you, dear brothers of surface. Here well a long time that I had not been in also good company and again on this planetary surface which, seems it, is not as well as possible of its form, according to what we could observe in our world's will intraterrestrial, with the various governors of the various areas. We observed indeed that the magnetic and terrestrial grids had evil to conform, from the resistance of humanity in her undivided totality, to be readjusted on the new harmonic frequencies which arrived here are a few days of your terrestrial time of surface and which invaded each alive piece on the level of the solar system. An enormous work was however carried out. Here are now 40 days of your time, to prepare this advent of what some among you call the energy of the central sun, that ourselves call in language old Shekinah and which corresponds to an overflowing of the Holy Spirit pre-upward roll which was foreseeable in this end of the year. Nevertheless, it seemed that the totality of undivided collective humanity one could not, for the moment, to accept and integrate completely this energy quality, this vibratory quality, to be able to carry out an pre-upward phenomena, such as you describe it in your language. What we can still say it is that this whole of modifications who occurred at the subtle level also corresponds to a major opening of the doors on the level of the world's will intraterrestrials of the fifth dimension. Indeed, the access doors are from now on permanently open to allow to and from, and especially eruptions in your reality of the third dimension which prepare to be able to intervene the convenient periods and to act on the world of surface, which is an extremely new thing and extremely constraining for our collective individualities of ground will intra. In any case, for us, people Delphinoe of this part of will intra ground. The delays inherent in the human nature, once again I repeat it, slowed down in a considerable way, and obstructed in a considerable way, the possibility of the Earth and its core will intraterrestrial of being able, not to climb, but pre-climb on a mode of the fourth dimension. That could be delayed to a long time under penalty of major damage only we will be able obviously to tolerate in no manner, that it is as for the future of this planet, of will intra-ground, and of the whole of the living beings, where which they are located as well surfaces some as in different dimensions of ground will intra, or elsewhere. There is, on the level of will intra-ground, in this moment even, an extremely important meeting of beings of will intra-ground but also hierarchies coming from solar systems extraneans, which are in connection with the sacral evolution of this planet to determine until when we can maintain elasticity and the existing distortion in this geomagnetotelluric and crown network which makes it possible to prevent that the light wave, that you receive since a certain number of days, is not, in its female polarity which incarnates, deviated towards certain forces which would not go in the direction of. The light authenticates and desired by galactic dimensions and will intraterrestrial of the authentic light. For some among you, it now has possibility granted there to be able to question, as for the whole of the phenomena called pre-rise. Question how to facilitate the communication with you? The communication conscious between the world of surface and the world will intraterrestrial of the fifth dimension becomes possible from the phenomenon of rise, in conscience, the fifth dimension. This rise in the conscience in the fifth dimension, from its expansion, allows itself to touch our contact, because recall you that we have lived for 320.000 years in the fifth dimension. You only start to open the doors towards our dimension and our morphic, conceptual, functional difference. A whole of differences existing between the human world and the world of the Delphinoes evolving moving in the fifth dimension establishes a link between what you call, dear brothers, 24 old men. The 24 old men refer to the council representing the lords and judges of the karma, taking care of the application of the strict rules of operation of the humanity of surface, compared to preset rules of operation in the third dimension. The fact of even raising your conscience regularly, gradually, with blows also, enables you, progressively, to activate channels of communication in an extremely natural way. The technique now that you must employ to facilitate this communication corresponds to something which I had already given to my walk-in, who am to try to function in individual conscience with 24 units. The collective unit of the 24 consciences which goes reagents or your molecules atomic, reagents or your light on the level will have them so as to allow you to function right now on certain occasions, certain moments. Mode 5th. I think of having answered the interrogation. Question: how, concretely, to create the synergy of 24? In the life, dear brother, that you describe as usual and ordinary, that seems indeed very difficult to me. It is advisable to create spaces, moments, where these collective means of communication will be possible. It is advisable to gather initially to 6, then to 12, and then to 18, and finally to 24. To work initially in a unit of 6. You point out that the light has 6 faces in the 5th dimension. From the moment when 6 beings are joined together in non-ordinary moments, moment that you will be able to call, dear brother, moments of prayer or moment of mediation or in any case moment of communion. In these privileged and particular moments, the simple fact of meeting in 6, by adopting a perfect geometrical provision of perfect hexagon and where each one will simply carry its conscience on the 5 other human beings present. Each one doing that on the 5 others, that will establish a communication of collective individual conscience to 6 units. That can take some breathings, a few minutes, or some meetings. When that is successful and is achieved at least once, you will know it instantaneously from emitted vibratory quality, received by each participant in the collective conscience. When the principle of the 6 is carried out on the level of the vibratory objective, you will be able at this time to integrate a group of 6 other individuals who are already as a preliminary made themselves the work on their side or absolutely not, and to recreate a double hexagon there, are grouped by par. At this time there in the double hexagon, each one will have initially to carry its conscience and its attention on the pair beside him, and then, and only after, on the other pairs and the 2 components of each pair. Thus, you will create an individual undivided collective conscience, and nevertheless unified, with 12 human entities. The same diagram will reproduce by triangle of 3 for the 18, and finally by the quaternary 1 of the 6, in other words 24, always in the same process in triangle or quaternary before passing to the totality of the 18 or the 24. You reassure, it is not an abstract but really energy process and of conscience which will occur at the time when that will be carried out. You will understand, in your conscience, that you succeeded in activating in you certain circuits which will be able again to never disappear in you. When you are the unified individual collective aware of the 24 entities, you will have completely achieved your goal. There is not something of extraordinary in it, nor something of magic but simply the goal of the consciences, which is to function, either in a way distingué, separated, partitioned, but quite to the contrary unified. Question: does a unified conscience imply to think the same thing, at the same time? Dear brother, absolutely not. Well, fortunately, you did not reach the level of conscience to be able to function in collective conscience in a permanent way. From the moment, on the other hand, where they will occur once, the channels will be definitively activated in you. You will understand it, you will feel it and will live it to you in a completely logical way. You cannot assimilate, to intellectualize something which you did not assimilate, intellectualize and even less not lived yet. The channels which are activated in these moments of communication are channels which were never implemented at the human being, in the human race, from the factors limiting of the third dimension. But nevertheless, the fact of having worked and to have activated in you certain extremely precise channels which allow the activation of the reception of the light, the level of the head, the activation of certain channels which allow the creation of roots of light, the level of your feet, is an extremely powerful argument on the facility which you will have to establish this collective conscience in these moments. I repeat it once again, privileged, and not ordinary. The important thing is not to function permanently like that, but nevertheless to activate in you these channels which will be quite useful from the continuation. But recall you that the goal is not to join together, to amalgamate consciences, but really to constitute a collective conscience. It is not completely the same objective. The important thing is to create, activate, awake these new channels of communication which will be quite useful for you at the proper time. Question: are the vibrations transmitted at present related to the central sun? Expensive brother, they can only come from the central sun. The energy awaited at the time of Midsummer's Day, which is impacted on the Earth since December 27th, corresponds really and completely to the female polarity of fertilizing the divine energy which makes it possible to fertilize the cells of any alive piece on this planet, so as to wake up it with its most spiritual dimension. And this energy is obviously in relation to the central sun of the galaxy, named Sirius A. Well, question: which will be the physical impacts of these evolutions? And quite dear brother, if you could see the aspect of the Delphinois of the fifth dimension, you would understand perfectly which type of evolution can be visible in the matter, this matter of the fifth dimension, after the impact of the energy of the Holy Spirit and the appearance of the collective conscience of the fifth dimension. There is a certain number of body modifications occurring according to the type of race, and the humanoid type or not humanoid, living this transformation. We can nevertheless schematize. One of the most important transformations occurs on the level of the operation even of the receptacle of the energy, which is the brain. There is first of all indeed a communication in a way much more intense, direct and easy, between the two hemispheres of the brain, corresponding to the appearance of a bridge of substance linking in way much more intense than the human being currently incarnated calls the two cerebral hemispheres. There is an development of a part particular to the top of the ears of the human being, explaining the appearance of an appendix existing at the dolphins, which we will be able to call third lobe of the brain, in fact third and fourth lobe of the neocortex, who are the paralimbic zones and who corresponds to the perception of sensory signals having nothing to do with your five integral directions, but in them the electric direction and the magnetic direction corresponding within the meaning of the Divine One. These modifications are extremely centered on a vascular modification occurring on the whole of the head of the race, which saw this transformation, being lived by congestive phenomena extremely marked on the level of the sensory openings, being able to induce nosebleed, congestions at the ocular level, congestions on the level of the ears but also of the gums, sometimes causing important bleedings in the beings subjected to this transformation. There are many other transformations occurring on the levels biochemical, biological, cellular, genetics also, but it would be extremely tiresome for the moment to return ahead in details of this transformation, which is completely measurable, quantifiable with your average techniques current existing on the surface of your ground. The transformation is transitory. The result, as for him, will be permanent on the level of the structures, but the life requires the return to balance and with homeostasis even if the level of conscience is deeply different and the vibratory level is deeply high. He concludes himself from it that after 1 week of disappearance of these congestive phenomena and dammings up on the level of the head, the return to the normal, at the bioconductive level, will be the rule. Question: which is your bond with OM? ANHAV? I personally met the ANHAV master of Alive Sound, at the time of a stay in India. It went in Agartha. It was received by the Council of the 24 Old Men. It should besides be known that the last incarnation of the Arianis Master on this planet, I should rather say phenomenon of walk-in with transfer of conscience of the bodies, was carried out during the 20th century in the life of its own master, who was Peter Dunov. Thus, Peter Dunov was the totality of the incarnation of the spirit of our master in Arianis. Question: which would be the consequences of a delay in overflowings of energy? The time of delay could be spread out 15 days to 3 weeks. The consequences could go until the total perdition of the earth and the whole of its inhabitants of surface. Not of ground will intra, obviously, which will have had largely time to evacuate this planet, having failed in its role of sacralization. Question: could you explain what are these energies? Dear brother, energy, the power of the central sun which flowed since so many years and which found its apogee at the time of the Gene Saint of Winter, was not intended to make you function in collective conscience, but was intended to raise the vibratory level of the earth so as to allow him to pass in the 5th dimension, by the 4th initially. But for passing to the 5th, it is already necessary to go up in 4th. However, a certain number of forces of resistances, related to the beings of surface, attached the expansion of the level 4th and prevented the appearance and the blossoming of the level 5th with a delay which is already of several days. The magnetic networks and the terrestrial crown networks, which are maintained, I repeat it to you, by the people of will intra-ground Delphinos or not, are there to take care of the electronic fitting of the superficial structures, in connection obviously with the structures of the crystalline core of planet, in connection itself with the central sun. What we could that to note, unfortunately, it is the difficulty in making vibrate the core and thus making resound the worlds of surface compared to the distortion and the existing intensity of this distortion between the threshold necessary to the quantum activation of this 4th dimension and reality of what was observed at 27. That translated something of extremely prejudicial with the evolution of the whole of planet obviously, even if this process already occurred in other times and other places, into another planet if you prefer. Question: could you give a report on the vibratory level to us today on Earth? That is summarized with an incapacity to reach, from this existing distortion, the desirable and essential level to pass in this intermediate level 4th. An extremely powerful vibratory push was induced by the central sun, inducing, by reaction, a push of the core corresponding besides to an increase observed on the level of the transition cores called magma. This increase in pressure would have to induce obviously a push on the level of the bark, and thus a whole of elementary geological modifications on the level of the whole of the planet, which unfortunately absolutely did not occur, having induced, consequently, an incapacity of the earth to answer, on the level of the bark of surface, the spiritual impulse which was given. The damage for the moment is not irreversible on the level of the core, but the constraint increases very quickly. Imagine an extensive pressure to which is opposed a compressive pressure. Who will carry it? Question: can we help this process? Any human being, taken within an individual capacity, can help the collective phenomena. But compressive forces preventing itself from finding the light, prevent also the forces of expansion of the core. They are bound, I said it previously, with the whole of the alive consciences incarnated on the world of surface. Obviously that each thought of light, obviously that each positive emission of light, comes to reduce the compressive phenomenon, but that the effort to be deployed for the moment is especially requested from the level of those which have already access. We cannot that to reinforce even more the level of ground will intra and of the core, the force of expansion influenced and sown by the central sun, up to an extreme point of distortion between the expansive forces and the compressive forces. We are during this time of uncertainty as for the wavering of various energies in a direction or the other. Question: what can it occur? Dear brother, there exist three cases of possible figure, that is to say the forces of expansion manage to print and relay, on the Earth's crust, the totality of received energies of the central sun, in which case there will be readjustment elementary and geological major but not final, allowing the Earth to align itself, to realign itself under the cosmic influences, I would say a little more positive, in which case it is the result awaited by the forces of the authentic light and the intergalactic confederation. Second case of figure: the level of compression, forces oppositional, becomes such as nothing can be made to avoid what one calls a planetary explosion. Third case of the figure, most difficult to obtain, which consists in balancing, in a phenomenon of status quo, compressive forces and expansive forces until a new threshold of influence of expansive energies, maintaining the Earth's crust, in a level of extreme tension but nevertheless livable, by hoping that a new threshold, having to reproduce before the summer of the year 2006, finally makes it possible the forces of expansion to arrive at their goal. Now if the statu quo is maintained until a forthcoming overflowing that is translated nevertheless on the level human being by phenomena of increasingly large tensions, increasingly large distortions on the level of the human heart, between these compressive polarities of attraction towards the matter and expansive of expansion towards the light. But all is possible because this episode of status quo, of balance between the two involved forces, is an extremely unstable phenomenon by nature. But that depends on all the wills, directed in a direction or another, as well on the level of the world of surfaces of the various factions existing in ground will intra. That depends only on the involved forces and the reality of the confrontation of the involved forces. Question of the crystals can facilitate the integration of these energies? There is on this level, not, dear brothers and sisters, of stones specific to each heart, but indeed certain crystals which can enable you to carry out an alignment more favorable to the free expression of the expansive process of descent of the radiation of the central sun Sirius inside your structures. For example, the stone which will enable you to align your physical, mental and spiritual structures with this vibration and at the same time you root celestial obsidian, to carry it permanently, not necessarily in precise places will chakras or others but simply with you. It will be time for me to turn over in my area of the fifth dimension and to leave my walk in returning after its small voyage. I greet you,